Hey guys, I got my friend Brendan Hasty here. Thanks so much, Brendan, for coming all the way to the LA area.
You're welcome. It was only a little flight over the pond, just 11 hours.
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your career from my audience that may not know you already, which you should definitely check out his channel. Could you tell us a little bit about your career path and a little bit about your career channel, or your structural engineering channel as
Sure.
well?
So my career path has probably been a little bit different compared to what you would say a normal engineer. When you're first starting out, you're thinking about where you're going to go with your career. You start at a big company and you keep moving up through a big company. I actually started at a really small company. I had about 5-10 engineers, which I thought was really good for my career. At least I got my hands dirty. I got to deal with like a lot of one-on-ones, and it actually helped me progress the structures. Like a small structure is really the same as a big structure. There's no real difference to it. Beyond that, then I moved into what you would call your tier one companies, which is your Arcadis and Hyder. And then at WSP, I moved up through WSP through the ranks, and I end up being the structural lead for technical aspects within WSP Australia. It's only recently now that I've actually moved out of that and moved into a startup called Azuru Tech, which is really looking to disrupt the industry. He said the construction industry really hasn't changed in the last 20 to 30 years. It's really up for some disruption, and we're really looking to move into the automation, automate structures from end to end, really improve that user experience from start to finish, and hopefully reduce the cost of housing. So we're both not to be tackling just the ease and disruption, but tackling the price of housing, so tackling the housing crisis, and also heading towards net zero. So it's really an interesting time over the next couple of years, and it should be really exciting.
Yeah, I know that's one of the things with the industry, with the AEC, architectural engineering construction industry. It's not as fast as tech, but I know we definitely want to get there, especially with all of the building construction and housing problems that we're having all over the world.
Yes.
And I think structural engineers can be a big part of that, part of the solution. I wanted to start off with the younger engineers and progress through the ladder for young engineers that are coming straight out of school, graduating. Do you have any career advice for them? Maybe they're looking for a job or they just got their first job.
Yes. So if you're just looking for a job, getting your first job is obviously the hardest point of view. So if you're in that point and you're trying to find that job, so I wouldn't just look at the big companies, also look at the small companies, and I would recommend you, if you can, to start those small companies. It's great to work at those big companies, but you will be sometimes restricted to just specific little designs, which can be really boring and really restrict you progressing your career further. So I would recommend you opening up that, and then worst case scenario, maybe you do need to go to a recruiter, or even looking for some of those internship jobs where you really prove your weight as an engineer. So that's how I started out. I ended up starting as an intern in second year university, even before I graduated. And then within a week they went, oh, no, you're good, we have to pay you. It's not fair for us not to be paying you for that. So I would recommend you trying to get those opportunities, and when you grab them, really seize them. But when you're first starting out, it's really hard. There's a lot that you need to learn, and there's probably something that I recommend everyone is to keep learning. So either, through my YouTube channel, Matt's YouTube channel, reading, wherever you're going through, trying to get as much information as possible to learn. That's something you're going to be doing through your career. I'm 15 years out now, and I'm still learning stuff today. So there's a lot of broad range of technical aspects that you need to focus on as an engineer. So I would recommend that you're not stopping learning just after you graduated, but it's something you're going to keep learning over and over again in your career. Now, learning is not just even those hard skills. Your technical skills are really important. You need to get good at them. It's not something you can leave behind. But if you want to progress your career fast, it's your communication skills, because everything we do is some form of communication, whether that be written, verbal, the documents we produce. So working on those communication skills, and communication skills aren't just you speaking or you trying to progress your advice. So it's not even just the technical stuff, because you're going to be talking to people of different levels of technical ability. So you're talking to an architect who may not know as much. A builder may know a little bit more, but they come at it a different way. So you need to make sure that you're progressing you're displaying your knowledge across to them so that they appropriately know what you're talking about. But also, it's not just about spoken. To be an effective communicator, you also need to be able to listen. It's about actively listening and understanding what their problems are, so that you can say, look, you're having this problem, I'm having this problem, and this is the way we can address both your issues. Because if you're coming at a way where you're trying to solve their problems, they'll be much more receptive to help you out as well. So communication is not just about spoken or your communication, but it's also about you listening as well, making sure you're addressing their problems.
Do you have any, I know you've seen a lot of new engineers come in throughout your career. what are some of the biggest mistakes that they tend to do for young engineers or interns that start working?
Start working after a couple of years, they seem to think that they know everything, and then they'll start talking back to you. They get really arrogant, and you're like, oh my god, you don't know anything. Like, you don't understand. They argue with you. Yeah, I'm assuming it sounds like you've had a similar.
Yeah, it's just a quick story for me. It's like working with plan checkers that had a lot of experience. It's like what they've always told me. What, 1 year you don't know anything at all. 3 years in, you still don't know anything. 5 years in, okay, you're starting to learn. Like, you're green. You're kind of like not being green anymore. But it takes at least 5 years to, if you're in the trenches, I think, where, like, I still don't know anything. You know, it feels like it's sometimes where there's just so much to learn in this industry, and even as it's evolving, there's always something new to learn.
Yeah, and there's just so much the broad of knowledge. I think, have you ever seen the Dunning-Kruger effect about how you learn? You go into this, what you call the valley of despair, where you realize what you do not know, because it's really hard to. It's what you don't know is the hardest things. But when you're starting to realize you don't know stuff, it means that you're going to be a little bit more careful. You're going to be focusing on things a little bit more and trying to learn that. So if you get to that point where you're realizing you don't know a lot, it's actually a good place to be, because you're starting to go up the other end and you're starting to realize actually how much broad knowledge you need as an engineer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the, for me, the best things about this career is always learning something. And if you're not, then I think there's always opportunities in different career paths in structural engineering where you can always learn something new. For the ones that are trying to move up, maybe engineers that are trying to become project managers or move up in the ranks at their firms, do you have any advice for them?
So move up through the ranks is sometimes you do need to move companies, unfortunately. But if you are looking to stay at your firm, is just being open and honest. You've got to realize that you are the master of your career. It's not up to your manager or your boss or the next boss to make sure that your career is progressing as it should be. It's up to you to make sure that you're progressing the right way. You've got to make sure you're tracking what type of jobs you've been working on. Do you have a broad range of experiences in different types of areas? And when you come to those, when you come to your end of year review or monthly review or weekly review or whatever you may be doing, discussions with those managers is, look, I want to try and work on these type of projects. I want to try and get this type of experience. This is the way I want to see your career going, because they don't know where you want your career to go. As an engineer, there's different fields that, we can go into technical, we can go into management, we can go into project management. There's all these different areas that we can go to as an engineer, but they don't know you personally and where you would enjoy your career. It's something that you're going to try and do for the rest of your life, so it's something you want to be able to do. So it's up to you to make sure you're taking control of that. The one thing I would recommend as well is taking the difference between your pay, now pay is important, and your where you're progressing your career. They should be almost two separate conversations, because people get racked up in the mind and they always want one thing, and sort of disrupts of where you're trying to progress your career and your advice. So wherever possible, yes, progressing your career will help you increase your pay, but it's something that should be almost like a separate conversation with your manager. I'd also recommend that you have more than just that end of year's reviews, maybe sitting your manager aside, go and have a coffee, having that one-on-one conversations about where you see your career progressing, because then they can help you out a little bit more. The more that they know from you, the easier it will be for them.
Yeah, it's always a bad sign when I know in companies where all of a sudden someone leaves and the company doesn't know why. It's like that lack of communication, but it's a lot more easier, and I think more bridge burning when that conversation with your manager happens, and at the end, if you do decide to leave, it's mutual. The company tried, they couldn't do it, or it's just a consequence of your life, that whatever you're going through at that moment, and it's mutual. It helps sustain that relationship a lot more than just, see you guys, I'm out.
And you got to realize as well, probably in as Australia and even probably the US as well, engineering is a really small community, and you don't want to burn the bridges behind you, because you may not go back to the company you're working for, but they may move on to other companies as well and then be the person in control of hiring people. So you make sure you don't want to burn those bridges behind you, because it is a small industry and word gets around quite quickly.
Yeah, and it's even getting more smaller with social media. Like on LinkedIn, I've networked with people from all over, UK, India, Australia, and so it's becoming more and more small, even though it is an international, worldwide industry. I think it's great how it's becoming less. It's more smaller and smaller, so you really don't want to burn any
Yes.
bridges when you don't need to. Speaking of some of the international, I know we have some international students that are looking to get into the maybe the States or Australia or other countries. Do you have any experience with that, or in terms of working with them, or any advice for international students looking to work in different countries?
Probably, depending on whether you're actually studying there or not, it's trying to get your foot in the door. Obviously, what they're going to be concerned about is more so your communication skills. Now, not to say your communication skills are bad, but that's when they say that's potentially what the first thing they'll think about. So your communication skills probably have to be better than the average person that you come out there, but after they see you, and then that will make them feel more comfortable. It's probably just, and it's always getting that first job in the door is always the hardest, because they don't necessarily know, especially if you're coming from overseas working, do you know the Australian standards, do you know the US standards, what type of codes you're working with, can you actually deal with it, because there's quite a lot of learning in between there. And when you first move out there, you may need to take a pay cut or even drop down a couple of positions, because you may not have the knowledge or local knowledge that you think you will need to. But provided you're confident in your skills, you'll progress up the career faster after that point, after you've proven that you have that ability. So it's the hardest bit is getting that first job, and then getting the foot in the door, and then proving that you have the skill set to be able to deliver.
Yeah, and I know that's when both of our companies are hiring international students. Yeah, that's definitely one of the things. Can they communicate? And even technically, yes, are they good technically? But like you said, are their communication skills good? And I think, at least for me personally, one thing I look for is, can we teach them? Are they humble? Are they do they have good character? And are they easy to work with? So things like that, more than just, are you super good at math or engineering? There's more to an engineer than just technical stuff. But do you know, in terms of these technical skills, I know you've recently changed companies, and you were working with the Australian code.
Yes.
And now you're working with all sorts of codes, right?
Yeah, putting every code around the sun at the moment.
So what's your process like, or what's your advice for new, mid, or maybe even senior engineers that are trying to learn new codes? What's your process of learning a new code? I'm curious. Since it's completely different now.
It's probably something is a lot of reading, a lot of looking through the codes. It's very hard sometimes because codes aren't the best written. I'm sure you've read them, and they can be confusing at the best of times.
I compare it to it's lawyer speak with numbers. It's like sometimes like that.
Yeah, so, but even that, just reading through the codes, trying to find design examples. But the one thing you will find is that that whatever the answers you get, they'll be the same. It doesn't matter where you are, like the answers and the numbers will be the same, whether you're in Australia, the US, you'll get roughly the same answers. Configurations don't really change. Probably the one thing I would recommend you looking at, so you can do the numbers as you normally do, but look at the detailing things. They're probably the ones that change the most, I found, is like, where do you need anchor reinforcement? At what point of reinforcement needs to be anchored? Where do you need to put stirrups? So that's probably the one thing as well, is knowing the terms, because I know in Australia we call shear reinforcement ligs or ligatures. I think in the US they call them stirrups.
Yeah.
In the UK they call them links. So understanding the lingo and how they call different things, they're the same thing, they're just called different things around the world.
And I think it's like you were saying, all the codes are different, probably in the detailing, but overall they're still trying to achieve the same thing in terms of ductility and concrete behavior or material behavior, but they kind of do it in different ways and maybe different detailing.
Yes. You almost get to the same answer. Now there's a bit of difference between what you probably find between like where we are in California versus probably something in Texas or somewhere where it's more stable. The earthquake requirements are probably the ones that change the most globally as well. So Australia's got low earthquakes, so we don't have much detailing requirements. There's a little bit, and it's progressed. But even some of the learnings that we've had down from Christchurch, which was a really big earthquake down in New Zealand, has gone globally, really. I think it's rewritten the codes in Australia, it's rewritten the codes in New Zealand, and it sounds like it's also rewritten the codes in...
Yep, US ACI as well, some studies over there. Mm-hmm.
So you can see that globally, things are the same, doesn't matter where you are. Physics is physics. It's not like it changes depending on where you are in the world.
Yeah, we don't want concrete to spall or explode. We want to prevent those types
Cracking.
of failures. Yeah, and all the researchers that go into that, and taking lessons from all around the world. I remember back in grad school learning from professors and where they're getting the research from. Yeah, it's really interesting, and how that type of work goes into influencing the new codes. It's kind of like eye-opening, like, oh, this is where that code came from. Because sometimes you'll read the code and you'll just be like, why?
but even there's some things in the codes where like there is some things where they've just gone, why? And now I've talked to code committee members and they're like, they can't tell me why that is. It's like, it makes no sense because of these things. It's just what they like to do.
Yeah, sometimes I've heard where sometimes like in those code committee meetings, sometimes it's kind of just like you said, like you don't know where it came from and the code committee members don't know where it came from. Sometimes it's kind of, I think I've heard where it's just, they felt that was a good number. That factor was a good number. Like, yeah, everyone votes for it.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of a black box sometimes, but join the code committees if you're really interested. And I think
apparently people have fights all the time. I've talked to some of them. They said that some of them in Australia, at least, they'll have almost stand-up shouting matches at each other because one likes to do it this way, the other one likes to do it that way, and they're just yelling at each other. Like no one has any reason. It's just what they like to do.
Kind of off topic, but kind of related to that. Is that the same code process where they have code committees in Australia, and that's where the codes
That's
come
where
from?
the codes derive from, typically normally from university lecturers as well. Obviously with codes, you've got to realize engineering is always probabilistic based. So whenever you're looking at changes to the code, I'm sure it's the same in the US as well, there's a number done about how much is this going to cost the industry versus the risk that it's actually saving. So there's a cost benefit analysis that's done in there depending on whether is it really worth it, because 1 in a million buildings failing is not worth costing everyone hundreds of thousands of dollars in changes. So sometimes there is that cost benefit analysis, and there is committees there that are typically made up of a lot of academics. But yeah, if you are interested in that stuff, it definitely needs probably more of a industry focus sometimes as well, because overcomplicating designs and making the code more complex is not necessarily the best answer, because it's going to make our design as design engineers harder. Sometimes it's easier to simplify and be a little bit conservative.
Yeah, and I think it takes practicing engineers to be on those councils to help with that too.
Yes.
So if that's something that you're interested in, or if you want to have a voice,
Yes.
joining those committees. It's like, for me, it's like I don't want to complain too much because I'm not in any of those committees, and that's an opportunity. So, Brendan, I did have a question about, you mentioned and talk a lot about communication skills. What are some of the things that engineers can do to improve their communication skills at work? Maybe how to practice them or how to get more experience and improve them?
Probably the one thing I would recommend is going to, depending on what you're trying to improve, is probably just stepping out and trying to communicate to people. Like, I find that communication, discussing people with ideas is probably the best way to learn. It's learned by doing effectively, because don't feel nervous about communicating, asking questions, or trying to get to the answer, because you've got to realize that everyone's been there at some point. No one starts out knowing everything. So the only way you get better is by doing that, and depending on where you're trying to communicate to is knowing your audience really is probably the best one. So when you're in the field, you're working with colleagues, you've got to realize that people have got different stresses and point of views, and sometimes you maybe just need to walk away from conversation because they're really stressed, and sometimes it's just not going to work. But it's also then stepping out and asking those questions and getting to see how people respond and what they do. If you're trying to work out one-on-one like communications, I would recommend you, even if you're not going to be doing a YouTube channel, record yourself, listen to how you speak, how you progress, how your communication is going to the screen as well, and see how you're actually there, because you don't actually realize how you're communicating without actually seeing and listening to what you're actually saying. I just know from my old videos, some of the stuff I listen to and read, I'm like, oh my God, what am I saying? It was nonsense. I was saying things like in the design and things that just don't make English sense.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you guys should try it. Try recording yourself, and you're gonna hate it. I remember even just doing a recording on the phone when I was first starting out. It's so awkward, but like you said, it's a skill, and you get better at it, and eventually, we just keep getting better and better.
Yeah, but you don't even need to upload it to YouTube or anything. Just recording and seeing how your mannerisms are will be beneficial just for your own feedback as well. But even going out to other things like, for example, Toastmasters or other events as well, to get that public speaking skill up, it's really a practice. Even if you're not going to speak in the public, at least if you're going to an organisation like that, which help with your public speaking, they can give you good feedback about how you've communicated those skills. And normally those people there have got a broad range of experience, so it's more like the people that we're dealing with don't necessarily have that engineering knowledge, so you can see and test your ability to communicate some of your complex ideas to them, because not everyone has that same level of ability, so you've got to be able to break down some of those most complex ideas to their simplest form, which is really the art. It's so hard to do that, and it really gets you to understand how much you actually know. The other thing I would recommend as well, when you're starting to move up there, is taking on and looking at the juniors and trying to explain to them those complex ideas as well. That will help you out to solidify your knowledge, but also help them out, but also then work out how you need to communicate to break down those more complex ideas.
And I wanted to bring up one of the challenges in the structural engineering industry, depending on what firm you're working at or whatnot, and maybe even the structural engineering industry. But what are your thoughts on work-life balance for engineers that may want to achieve that, or I guess what are your general thoughts on that?
It's probably at certain points you've got to realize that we are mostly a project-based design, so sometimes you're not going to get that work-life balance. Sometimes you're going to have to work late. You have to get the project out, right? The project times don't change. But in between there is making sure you're taking the time out, making sure you're taking the time to clock off, setting those expectations sometimes. One thing I would recommend, which is something I've got to get back into, is a little bit more exercise. I was doing it quite a lot during COVID, but then COVID came back and I got a little bit busy and it sort of backed off quite a lot. But exercising as well. I would, probably one thing that I think I've done a lot less now is watching like Netflix or Prime Video and actually getting out and talking to people, socialization, something you're probably not used to since we can't be that, you know?
Yep.
But it helps a lot. So I probably would recommend it. Just setting aside times, sometimes even you know a couple of times a weekend, or setting aside, even if it's just for you to go for a walk on the beach or something, is setting aside that time that you won't be working. Setting aside, if you've got kids, making sure you're setting aside time for the kids or the family.
Yeah, I know you've got a family too, and YouTube and work, and it's that's really impressive to be able to balance all that stuff too. And it comes with a lot of work, but it comes with balance as well.
Comes with a lot of reward, but it's trying to balance that out, and then just making sure you're getting onto a schedule. You'll be surprised at how much time you actually waste if you sit down and write what you do every day.
Yeah, I think like what you said, you'd be surprised how much time you're on maybe the internet or Netflix, and that was like, I binge watched an episode. That was 8 hours. You binge watch a series. That was 8 hours of, maybe I could have been spending time with my family or exercising or something else. Yeah, and I think having that communication with your employer too, expectations on what you can work, but also like you said, it is for the most part it's a project deadline, kind of like school. You got a project that's due. Sometimes you just got to put in the hours, and hopefully your firm rewards that or compensates you in some way. And did you have any advice, because you've gone all the way up, all the career path ladders?
Yes.
Do you have any advice for maybe managers that are looking to get up in maybe not just a higher role, but what are those roles after management that are maybe you're 10 years into your career? What do you think those middle managers should aspire to or try to be? Or
I think probably improving those communication skills is obviously the biggest one. Is that when you get up in your management, your communication skills become more and more important, but also that technical aspect as well. But also stepping back and looking at, where do you want your career to go? Where do you want to see in the next 5, 10, 15 years as well? Sort of mapping out that roadmap. What skill sets do you need to pick up to be able to get there? Being open and honest with your manager and your higher ups about where you want to be going, but actually looking at, do I actually want to be doing this? Sometimes it's better to be stepping back and having a look at, where do you want to see your career going in the next 15 years? Probably the one thing I did regret not doing earlier is obviously saving We've got a plane going over.
LAX.
We're a little bit close to LA, so we'll see there. But probably the one thing I do regret not doing early is looking at investment. Where do I see my assets going? Because the biggest thing about money is it's compounding interest. So the more you save, if you do the numbers as engineers, we love doing the numbers. You sit down and realize the earlier I save the money, the more it's worth. So not setting aside that nest egg early enough is probably one of the things I don't always see there. But also, it's not with your career, because when you realize this and realize about how much you save and how much you can earn, you can realize that your money is not worth as much. So it's better to get that better experience and a better job, because if you start setting aside that money, you'll make the money, you'll have enough money in the end. Money's not hard to get, really, if you actually look at it. But yeah, so it's about you planning out about where you want to be going, and soft skills is probably the weakest aspect of most engineers, and that's probably the one thing you will need to work on when you're moving up there. But also taking the risk. I always find a lot of time, a lot of the senior managements aren't willing to make that effort or take the risk necessarily to make calls or drive in a certain way, because they're being a little bit conservative. But if you find that you just say yes to opportunities, you'll find that you'll get better and better opportunities coming to you, and things will end up being better in the end. So it's not about being scared, but actually saying yes to whatever opportunities are given to you.
Yeah, so it's taking into account your financials and the long term, but also asking those big questions about what you want to be doing in the future. Do you see yourself doing X, Y, Z in the next 5 years, 10 years? And like you said, I think if you have an engineering job, it's not like, well, at least in the US, it's a decent paying job. But I think what's even harder than finding that is, a job that you enjoy. And I think that has to do with what you want. And I think that's the thing that you got to ask yourself. A lot of this stuff is coming from you. Maybe you don't like your job, but maybe you're a player and you just overwork yourself all the time. Doesn't matter what job.
Yes.
And it kind of comes from you. So I think asking those questions about yourself, how you work and what you want to do, and how that fits into your financial situation.
Yes.
Very good advice. Brendan, thanks for coming on
welcome.
outside and coming out here, and it's really cool to see you visit here, and I'm glad we can do these videos together. So
That's
thanks so much.
Hopefully it's good for your audience as well.
Yeah, I know I don't get a chance to speak to a lot of international engineers too, and I've always been curious about what are things over there like, and it's really cool that now you get to work on all of the different building codes and seeing how those those countries work with their codes too. That should be exciting.
Probably the hardest one I've been finding as well in the US is not just the building codes though, but you also got to go to California, you've got to go to Texas, you've got to go to Florida. They've all got different changes to the codes.
They all have their own CBC. Welcome to the US and all the different codes.
So you got to it's not just one code. It's probably there's more changes normally when you're changing states than you are countries.
Yeah, let me know. If you need to know stuff about California, let me know. I'll give you my experience.